Good afternoon, everyone. A key feature of the Sustainable Development Goals is to commit to prioritize the most excluded. More than 4 years into the 2030 agenda, is this really happening? In this talk, I want to look at this question through the lens of young people in humanitarian contexts. So let's start by looking briefly at the targets against which progress is measured and the extent to which internally displaced and refugee adolescents are reflected. So of the 169 SDG targets, less than a quarter, just 39, are gender-related, and only 15 have gender and adolescent-related targets. If we then think about adolescent girls and boys in humanitarian settings, the focus in the Sustainable Development Goals is thinner still. Refugees account for more than 25 million people around the world, and IDPs 40 million, and more than half of these are under 18 years. However, despite these numbers, refugees and IDPs are not singled out as a specific population under any of the 17 goals. The International Organization on Migration and the UN Commission for Refugees have suggested that 12 targets are particularly relevant to migration and forced migration, but just 4 of these are disaggregated by gender and age. Without explicit measurable targets, the risk is that young people in humanitarian contexts are likely to be omitted from national plans and SDG roadmaps and the related resources that go with those. The Gender and Adolescents Global Evidence GAGE program is generating evidence on almost 5,000 young people in IDP and refugee communities in East Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, as part of a broader mandate to strengthen evidence-informed policies and programs so that no adolescent girl or boy is left behind. In terms of education, while there have been considerable efforts to ensure that there is no lost generation, our findings still paint a very sobering picture. We found, for example, that Syrian and Palestinian refugee adolescents in Jordan are 26% more likely to be out of school than adolescents from host communities. If we then apply a gender lens, the picture is more complex. While refugee boys are more likely to have poor attendance and drop out of school due to pressure to engage in paid work, our findings underscore that out-of-school girls face social isolation. 1 in 3 do not leave their home on a daily basis due to conservative gender norms. This also means that once out of school, adolescent girls have very limited access to skills-building opportunities needed to generate income. In terms of age and gender-based violence and the right to bodily integrity, our findings highlight that IDP and refugee adolescents face heightened risks. So while adolescent boys are especially vulnerable to physical violence from peers and also corporal punishment by teachers and parents, girls face very high rates of gender-based violence. Adolescent girls in refugee contexts are especially vulnerable to child marriage. So of the older age cohort in our study in Jordan, 1 in 5 Syrian and Palestinian refugee girls were already married. We also found that early divorce is frequent and often results because of intimate partner violence. Experiences of sexual violence were also frequently reported. During border conflicts, our research with IDPs in Ethiopia indicates that displaced adolescent girls are highly vulnerable to sexual violence and sexual torture, especially if they're separated from their families due to their role as domestic workers or due to child marriage. Unmet health and mental health needs are another critical challenge which deserves greater attention. So many adolescents in humanitarian contexts have experienced significant trauma. As one 17-year-old adolescent girl from Ethiopia explained to us, "We passed through fire. We were seriously beaten. We observed when individuals were beheaded and individuals were discarded just like birds. We do not have an interest for anything now. We do not get satisfied whether we eat or not." Similarly, in Jordan, our findings show that older Syrian and Palestinian adolescent girls are 20% more likely to suffer from mental distress as their male peers. This is exacerbated by a dearth of good quality psychosocial services, which are too often not part of core humanitarian responses, and also limited opportunities for girls to socially connect with peers. So to conclude, our findings point to at least 6 priority policy and programming actions. First, it's essential that all humanitarian programming adopts an age and gender-specific lens, given the specific vulnerabilities of young people and IDP and refugee communities. Second, to support young people's resilience in crisis context, access to education and skills building is critical, and social protection, such as cash transfers, if delivered to scale, could play a key role in achieving this. Third, ensuring adequate access to labor markets and social protection for adult household members is critical to reduce reliance on child marriage as a coping strategy. Fourthly, we need to also reframe mental health services for IDP and refugee adolescents as essential and not a mere add-on, and simultaneously to invest in safe spaces for in and out of school adolescents so that they can socialize with their peers. And finally then, as we approach the 5-year mark of the SDGs in 2020, we need to be advocating together for the inclusion of specific targets on adolescents affected by forced migration, so that we can ensure that truly no adolescent, girl or boy, is left behind. Thank you.